All right. Hello and welcome to the March 2024 Comic Cast, or Comic Club, sorry, for Edo Comic Club. Today we will be talking about the Uncanny X-Men Bishop's Crossing, specifically Uncanny X-Men, the 1981 run, issues 281 to 290. Trigger warnings include mentions of sexual assault and harassment in the context section. In the plot summaries, there is mention of non-consensual kissing. Some issues, including issue 289, use outdated racial terms, borderline slurs. Comics contain some outdated ableist terminology as well. So these comics are written by John Byrne, Whilce Portacio, Jim Lee, and Scott Lobdell, with pencilers Whilce Portacio for issues 281 to 286 and 289, John Romita Jr. for issue 287, and Andy Kubert for issue 288. As well, there is a small army of inkers working on these issues. Issue 287 alone had 5 inkers working on a single issue. I'm not reading out all the names. My voice won't last that long, but I will mention that Bill Sienkiewicz should stand out, not just because I've highlighted the name on the slide, but because he worked on the Moon Knight comics in the March 2022 Edo Comic Cast. Similarly, there's a whole bunch of colorists across these issues. Previously on Uncanny X-Men. Sorry, I had to. It's just, yeah, I had to. So, the comic X-Men. I'm just going to do a quick run through of the X-Men publishing timeline up to this point. I swear I'm being at least semi-concise. The comic X-Men was created in 1963 by writer Stan Lee and artist Jack Kirby. The X-Men were second-tier Marvel characters throughout the 60s, with a team donned in yellow and blue outfits, consisting of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, a furless version of the Beast, and Warren Worthington III, aka Angel, led by Professor Xavier, with a smattering of other recognizable mutants cropping up in a recurring capacity. Due to low sales, in 1970, the title stopped writing new stories, just republishing old issues with continued numbering for 5 years. See the slide for an example of the reprint strategy. In this case, X-Men issue 84, that was published in 1973, is a direct reprint of X-Men issue 36 from 1967. In 1975, Len Wein and Dave Cockrum wrote Giant Size X-Men 1. Giant Size X-Men number 1 is a substantial, fun issue with attempts at characterization, authentic tries at recognizing that mutants would be born to other ethnicities and nations of the world, introducing mutants including Storm, Sunfire, Colossus, Thunderbird, and Nightcrawler, many in their first ever appearance. It is worth noting, for the sake of balance, the issue isn't perfect, relying a lot on stereotypes, most of them cringy even for the time, but it was a massive step forward in terms of diversity for the X books. Wein and Cockrum are often the forgotten creatives on the early X-Men books, wedged between the Stan Lee/Jack Kirby era and the era that followed. But without their work, the X-Men as we know them would not exist today. Comic buyers largely responded positively to Giant Size X-Men issue 1, so Marvel decided to do a Giant Size X-Men issue 2. Len Wein had taken over for Roy Thomas as Marvel's editor-in-chief, so he wouldn't have the time to write any more X-Men. So he co-plotted the next X-Men story with a 24-year-old Chris Claremont, and decided that instead of a giant-sized X-Men, they would break the story up and put it in the main X-Men book as issues 94 and 95. Chris Claremont was then largely the sole writer on the X-Men comic from issue 96 until issue 279, his run lasting 17 consecutive years. The title was originally just called X-Men until issue 142, then it changed to Uncanny X-Men, and has largely remained that way ever since. During that time, he started 3 spin-off comics: New Mutants, Wolverine, and Excalibur, the latest of which, that was me, cool. The latest of which is December's Comic Club comic. So Claremont's era concludes 2 issues before this comic club's first issue that we'll be covering tonight. Claremont left the X-Books due to disagreements with his editor Bob Harris of the last 12 months. The original plan was for Claremont to continue writing the main Uncanny X-Men comic, with Lee and Claremont co-plotting the new X-Men comic. Claremont and Jim had very different ideas as to what stories they wanted to tell, and Harris was aligned with what Jim was writing. Claremont was reduced to scripting the dialogue for their plotting and art. Jim Lee was sending the artwork to Claremont so late that occasionally Claremont would have to write the script overnight before sending it to the publishers. Harris wanted to bring Professor X back into the stories, while Claremont wanted to kill Wolverine and complete Magneto's transformation from villain to hero. Rumors suggest Claremont and Harris began communicating exclusively via fax machine, so that there would be a paper trail of the increasingly tense exchanges they were having. After Claremont's wife reminded him that they had a mortgage to pay, he negotiated to write the first 3 issues of the new spin-off comic titled X-Men. This would be, in effect, his severance pay. Claremont said, "What you have is a corporate disagreement between an employee and his supervisor, and in that light, the course of action becomes as clear as it is inevitable. The corporation instinctively supports its supervisors." Claremont would later return to various X titles in the 21st century, but the magic was gone, and never quite achieved the same level of sales, critical acclaim, or highs of long-term, interwoven storytelling that his original Uncanny X-Men run had. There was a pre-Comic Cast spoiler cast episode that Edo did of Claremont Stark's Phoenix Saga back in 2020. But, yeah. Look, every once in a while I'm a little too attached to the source material that Edo reviews, and I had to vow never to listen to that episode ever again. It did not do good things for my blood pressure. If tempted to try out the Chris Claremont era, dig into it via the Marvel Unlimited app and reach your own conclusions. It is very much a product of its time, but it's also a very novelesque beauty in its own way. Uncanny X-Men 281 and X-Men Issue 1 were simultaneously published on October 1st, 1991. Uncanny X-Men followed the Gold Team, consisting of Storm, Jean Grey, Iceman, Warren Worthington III, aka Archangel, Colossus, and very early on joined by new member Bishop, while the X-Men title followed the Blue Team, consisting of Wolverine, Cyclops, Gambit, Rogue, Beast, Jubilee, and Psylocke. While other mutant-led X titles, like the newly revamped lineup of X-Factor, recently started X-Force, replacing the New Mutants comics, Canadian team Alpha Flight, and United Kingdom team Excalibur existed, this was the first time having two comics concurrently running with X-Men in the title, each with distinct casts. Although there's been a multitude of changes to the naming and numbering of the titles, including sticking New, Astonishing, Amazing, etc. in front of the X-Men title, or the likes of Legacy after it, multiple books featuring X-Men in the title have been an almost consistent feature to the X books ever since. Initially, the Uncanny and X-Men titles had distinctly separate adventures following the Gold and Blue teams, although they were both operating out of the X Mansion and interacting with each other sometimes. But later, into both runs, they started operating like two halves of the same book, where a reader almost had to read an issue of each in order to understand one big story. The main lineup of the Blue Team, with the absence of Psylocke, and the addition of Gold Team's Storm and Jean Grey, were essentially the core cast for the X-Men the Animated Series, which began airing in 1992. This rocketed the Blue Team to iconic status, while the Gold Team that we're focusing on today has largely been overshadowed in people's memories of this comic era, although the Gold Team members plus Blue Team Psylocke all appeared to varying degrees in the 90s animated show, with Bishop having the largest recurring role. Personally, I find this Gold lineup the more interesting of the two comic lineups. Another part of what made the Blue Team, in addition to Jim Lee's art, so iconic, was the marketing strategy for the X-Men Issue 1 book, which had 5 interconnecting variant covers. X-Men Issue 1 sold 8 million copies, so it's worth noting that measuring comic sales is a messed up metric for success, measuring sales to comic distributors, not final endpoint comic customers. Comic distributors in the 90s were less newsagents and pharmacies and more specialized comic book stores, which weren't allowed to return excess stock to comic companies for a refund, which works differently to how normal books are sold. Probably something Lapcat could probably detail more accurately than I would be able to. So if 8 million copies are ordered by comic stores but only 12 people buy them, 8 million copies are still reported as being sold. X-Men Issue 1 was the start of the speculator boom, where people speculated that it being an Issue 1 would make it really valuable because of its popularity, so bought hundreds of copies, and therefore it's ultimately worth very little and can still be found in dollar store bins in some comic book stores to this day. I also have all of the interconnecting covers, personally, some of which you can see if you squint really, really hard in the background of my camera. Anyway, just confirming people are still with me. Excellent. Awesome. All right, Jim Lee. Adding in some spice there. Jim Lee entered the industry in 1987 as an artist for Marvel Comics, illustrating titles such as Alpha Flight and the Punisher War Journal, before gaining popularity on the Uncanny X-Men. Lee co-created the character Gambit with Claremont. Lee's style was later used for the design of the X-Men the Animated Series. Jim Lee's final issue was X-Men Issue 11. In mid-1992, unhappy with the lack of creative control and seeing the benefits of owning legal rights to his own creative properties, Lee left Marvel Comics alongside several other major creators to found their own publishing company, Image Comics, to publish their creator-owned titles, with Lee publishing titles such as Wildcats and Gen 13 through his studio Wildstorm Productions. Finding that the role of publisher reduced the amount of time he was able to devote to illustration, Lee sold Wildstorm in 1998 to DC Comics, where he continued to run it as a DC imprint until 2010, as well as illustrating successful titles in DC's main fictional universe, such as the year-long Batman Hush and Superman for Tomorrow storylines. Between 2010 and 2023, Lee has been promoted to first co-publisher of DC Comics, then sole publisher of DC Comics, while co-holding the title of Chief Creative Officer, CCO, of DC Comics. In May 2023, Jim Lee was promoted to president of the company. And just to clarify, he's no relation to Stan Lee. Aside from illustrating comics, he has done work as a designer or creative director on other DC products, such as action figures, branded automobiles, backpacks, and video games, including the titular character in Batman Rise of Sin Tzu, Scorpion's costume in the first Injustice game, and deluxe edition outfits in Gotham Knights. Outside of the comic industry, Lee has also designed album art for Daughtry's Leave This Town album and one of General Mills' monster-themed cereals for its 2014 Halloween edition, as seen in the slide. Jim Lee's departure from Marvel actually created a production crisis for the X-Men animated series. The makers of the animated series wanted the series to look as cutting edge and close to the designs of the modern comics, which were the Jim Lee X-Men comics. Having gotten initial designs of Wolverine, Cyclops, and Gina approved, they then got word from Marvel telling them not to use any of Jim Lee's art as references. Marvel's legal team, fearful that Jim Lee would try suing over the use of the designs. They were confident that the designs they had, the production team of the X-Men 90s animated series were confident that the designs they had would be the ones that would work to make the series a hit. So the X-Men animated team took a risk and did a model sheet of new character designs of the X-Men and a young and funny 1970s Hanna-Barbera version of the X-Men team. The risk in that scenario being that someone somewhere could potentially think the awful stuff is actually the good design. The heads of Marvel nearly had a heart attack seeing those horrendously mismatched designs and realized they had to do the version that was more like the Jim Lee art. So that's how they got to keep using the Lee costume designs and made them slightly more animatable for the cartoon's purposes. Scott Lobdell, one of the other writers of this Uncanny X-Men run, we won't really talk about beyond them having left the DC Red Hood and Outlaws comics they were writing and the comic industry at large in 2020 due to multiple accounts of sexual assault and harassment that came forward from victims for a second time. The same year, they had sold the script called Ball and Chain, which is still in route to production, set to star The Rock and Emily Blunt. Moving on to the pencilers. Whilce Portacio is a Filipino-American comic book writer and artist noted for his work on such titles as The Punisher, X-Factor, Uncanny X-Men, Iron Man, Wetworks, and Spawn. Portacio was also one of the 7 co-founders of Image Comics, though he did not become a full partner in the company and therefore was never a member of its board of directors. Portacio quickly departed from Image due to his sister's rapidly declining health, which led to her death, though in 1994, Portacio worked for Image to publish the Wetworks comics he would have worked on in 1992, except under Image's imprint Wildstorm, which was later acquired by DC. Whilce still works in the comic industry today, doing a mix of in-book and cover work for Image, DC, and mostly Marvel, most recently the 2024 cable miniseries and the 2022 X-Men Legends comics, and seems to still be on good terms and continues to work periodically with the various other co-founders of Image in their current endeavors. John Romita Jr. is a legendary American comics artist best known for his work from the 1970s through the 2010s for Marvel, for co-creating with Mark Miller the Kick-Ass franchise, initially under Marvel's Icon imprint and later republishing under Image Comics, and is the son of another legendary comic book artist, John Romita Sr. Romita Jr. has also worked on Amazing Spider-Man comics on and off since 1980, most recently doing chunks of the 2022 onwards run. John Romita Jr. worked with his late father numerous times. On some occasions, they would share penciling duties. Other times, one would do all the penciling and the other would do all the inking, including for the 1982 Amazing Spider-Man annual, which first introduced Monica Rambeau, which we touched on in our background for the November 2023 Comic Club, and for a number of Amazing Spider-Man issues, like the Roger Stern issue that first introduced Hobgoblin, previously referenced during the Doctor Strange comic cast in 2022. Just checking I'm still here. Yep. Okay, cool. All good. All right. Yeah. Yep. In addition to being credited as the co-creator of Monica Rambeau and Hobgoblin, John Romita Jr. is also known as the co-creator of Dazzler, Typhoid Mary, The Mutant Forge, Madam Web, created the original Morlock team, who conducted the infamous mutant massacre that saw the deaths of most of the sewer-residing mutant colony referred to as the Morlocks. Oh, the original Morlock team. They're not the original Morlock team. The ones that killed the Morlocks was the... Oh, but I'm having a mental blank. It also started with an M. Marauders, thank you. Yeah, I'm correcting that now. Yeah, the original Marauders team. Thank you. Coming through in a pinch there. Yeah, they also co-created Warland the Vampire, obsessed with hunting and feeding on spider totems across the Spider-Verse. Shuri from Wakanda, Scar, the son of Hulk, and Rachel Summers, the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey from an alternate future, who we will discuss in more detail in December's 2024 Comic Club about Excalibur. Moving on to Andy Kubert. Andy Kubert is the son of legendary Joseph Kubert, who founded the legendary art school, specializing in comic art and commercial illustration. The Kubert School, and there are several other family members who work in the comic industry as both artists and editors. Andy is both a graduate and instructor at the Kubert School. Andy began his comics career as a letterer at DC before illustrating books for DC, Dark Horse, and Marvel. Andy Kubert co-created Damian Wayne, the fifth Robin, with Grant Morrison, and penciled X-Men issue 30 that saw Cyclops and Jean Grey get married. So I'm going to run through most of the members of the Gold Team: Storm, Jean, Iceman, Archangel, Bishop, and a couple extra characters like Forge and the White Queen. Colossus, aka Piotr Rasputin, I'm going to largely skip over. He's Russian, his skin turns to metal, he's often portrayed as quiet, honest, and virtuous in 20th century comics. He likes making art, has an older brother called Mikhail, Soviet cosmonaut believed dead at the start of the story, with the ability to do spatial warping by manipulating subatomic matter and warp energy by altering their wavelengths to an unknown degree. His brother Mikhail has used these energies to teleport through space at a considerable risk. He's also able to fire energy blasts and affect others' energy-based powers. Colossus also has a younger sister, Ilyana, who has a very complicated backstory, but is commonly a member of the New Mutants team, going by the codename Magic, and is sometimes leader of the Hell Dimension known as Limbo. So, Storm. Aurora Munro, aka Storm, is one of the most powerful mutants on Earth, a trusted and wise leader of the team. With the ability to control and manipulate weather patterns, Storm has created a legacy of both freedom fighting and mentorship. Storm has a deep psychic bond to the life force of Earth itself, a connection that creates empathy with her towards life everywhere, big and small. The daughter of a rebellious Kenyan princess, Nader, and American photographer David Munro, Aurora was born in Harlem in New York, though her family relocated to Cairo, Egypt, when she was 6 months old. A few years later, Nader and David were tragically killed when a plane crashed into their house. Although she survived the event, Aurora would develop claustrophobia due to her time trapped in the rubble of her home. Left an orphan to wander the streets, Aurora picked pockets and stole to survive. As she got older and her powers manifested, Storm wandered the Serengeti and brought rain to villages in dire need of water. It is worth noting that the 90s animated series makes frequent reference to Storm's claustrophobia. This gets made fun of a little bit in the Edo catch-ups, and whilst that I fully understand that, I do also want to counter this with, if I can stand on the soapbox for just a couple of seconds to point out, Storm's powers being heightened and being affected by her emotional state. If you have a team member that's condition is claustrophobia that induces instant heightened panic that they're unable to control, the effect of which could cause a literal natural disaster, which could get you and your teammates potentially killed, and also potentially be hypervigilant too to make sure that doesn't happen, basically, whilst I'm around. Storm's claustrophobia is less of a thing in the modern comics, potentially suggesting that she's worked through some of that trauma. Storm lost all her abilities after being shot by a government agent, Henry Gyrick, who wielded a mutant depowering weapon invented by the mutant known as Forge. While she rested and healed, she had a dalliance with Forge, who neglected to be upfront about his part in depowering her, cutting her connection to nature, which sent her into a deep bout of depression, their relationship ending once she discovered his part in her depowering. Alright, Forge. Forge is a Native American mutant cyborg that first appeared in the Uncanny X-Men issue 184 in 1984, created by Chris Claremont and John Romita Jr. Forge has a cybernetic right hand and leg of his own creation, used to replace limbs he lost during a bombing raid as a soldier in the Vietnam War. Forge's mutant ability is having perfect photographic creativity when it comes to inventing machines and gadgets, being able to see the end result of an invention in his mind and build it instantly, skipping all the in-between steps that real-life inventors often require. Occasionally, Forge has used magic, although this aspect of his character hasn't been used in recent times, probably to avoid playing into Native American stereotypes. Forge is part of the Cheyenne tribe, a real-world indigenous people of the Great Plains of America. Storm and Forge did temporarily rekindle their relationship a second time in a story called Life Death, when an adversary banished them both to a dimension where they spent a full year secluded together, during which time Forge was able to invent a device to finally restore Aurora's powers. But this came to an abrupt halt when when Storm got de-aged to childhood by a mutant cyborg called Nanny, who wanted to make Storm easier to hold in captivity. Storm escaped in an adventure that saw her meet Gambit and introduce him to the X-Men. Storm has recently been re-aged to adult age in the famous Extinction Agenda crossover in Chris Claremont and Jim Lee's Uncanny X-Men issue 270. If you're wondering why I brought up Life Death specifically, there are two X-Men 97 episodes titled Life Death, just as a little tangential, connection. Jean Grey is one of the 5 original X-Men mutants with telekinesis and telepathy powers, often highlighted in comics with a pinkish glow around affected minds and objects. Jean has gone by several aliases, including Marvel Girl and Phoenix, but Jean Grey is the only name that's really stuck. Jean's personality is best described as choosing to be a caring, nurturing figure. She also has to deal with being an Omega-level mutant and the darker thoughts and impulses that accompany that power. Jean Grey is frequently in a relationship with Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. Jean has previously been replaced by the Phoenix Force, an immortal, indestructible manifestation of the prime universal force of life, and her actual self was eventually recovered from a cocoon on the deep ocean floor, seemingly returning from the dead in the eyes of her teammates. She's also been cloned. Her clone, called Madeline Pryor, who married Scott Summers and had a child with them, the child would grow up to become the mutant Cable. Jean has absorbed the memories of both her clone and of the Phoenix Force when it was posing as her at this point in time in the comics. Her connection to the Phoenix Force would be explored again in adventures after these sets of issues. She gets engaged in the Uncanny X-Men issue 308 to Scott Summers with their eventual marriage in X-Men issue 30, and they share a permanent mental link, always able to sense the other's thoughts and emotions. In the recent Krakoa era, they have an open relationship, bringing in Wolverine as a third. We've covered Iceman in the October 2023. Is it October? Yeah, October 2023 Comic Club. So his bio is going to be super brief. He is also one of the OG 5 X-Men. Bobby's abilities are able to manipulate ice and cold by freezing water vapor around him. These comics are more than 25 years before a writer will introduce and explore Bobby's queer identity to the Marvel Comics canon. Although a lot of the hallmarks for his complicated relationship with his father and how his father's bigoted, racist, mutant attitudes affect him and expresses itself in Bobby as repressing parts of himself are very much present here by this point in time in at least one of these issues. Typically, the more he tries to compromise with getting along with his father, the more miserable it ends up making him. He also only appeared fully with a voice in one episode of the 90s X-Men animated series. He made a couple of non-voiced cameos, I believe. in other episodes. Warren Worthington III, aka Archangel, formerly Angel, is one of the OG 5 X-Men from the yellow and blue outfit era, from a wealthy lineage, and his powers originally manifesting as feathery wings granting flight. Warren's wings are mutilated during the Mutant Massacre by the Marauders, a group of mutants hired to kill mutants while working for Mr. Sinister, an event which also wiped out the underground-dwelling mutants called the Morlocks, which Storm once won the leadership of through trial by unpowered combat. When Warren's wings developed gangrene, Cameron Hodge violates Angel's wishes and has his damaged wings amputated. The ancient mutant Apocalypse offers to restore Angel's wings and powers if Angel will serve him as one of his 4 horsemen. Apocalypse subjects Angel to extensive genetic alterations, giving him blue skin and organic metal wings which can cut through almost anything. The wings can fire the metal feathers as projectiles. Apocalypse gives Worthington the title of Death. He makes Worthington the leader of his 4 horsemen after Worthington beats the other horsemen in a fight and gives him a drug that removes his reservations to follow Apocalypse's dark plans. Death fights his former teammates, and Warren sadistically exploits the weaknesses of his friends to defeat them in combat. During a later attack on Manhattan, Iceman fakes his own death at Warren's hands, hoping the shock of killing a friend will enable him to break free of the influence of Apocalypse's drugs. Although freed, Warren refuses to rejoin the team, feeling that he has changed too much psychologically to be a hero. Warrington eventually rejoins the team after killing Cameron Hodge, who removed his wings, and killed Cameron Hodge was originally meant to remove his wings and killed one of Warren's ex-girlfriends as well. The dark thoughts and his damaged psyche still remain, though, as we commence these issues that we'll be covering tonight. Lucas Bishop was created specifically for the gold team, as they were comparatively underpowered compared to the blue team and had one fewer member. Interestingly, he was originally supposed to be Filipino. Whilce Portacio was really big on getting more Filipino representation in comics, but Marvel editorial said that Bishop should specifically be black, because X-Men had a big following among black readers at the time, and a lot of them were writing in, asking why the X-Men didn't have a black man on the team. These stories were his first appearance, and he was quickly incorporated into the second season of the X-Men animated series in the 90s, also portrayed as a time traveler and mutant from a darker timeline that he is trying to prevent by traveling to the present day. Bishop is frequently portrayed as using giant guns and can absorb energy focused against him and redirect it at enhanced levels or store it in his personal bioenergy reserves, increasing his strength and endurance to peak levels or channeling the charge into concussive blasts. Bishop's great-grandfather, seen briefly in these comics, they are the Aboriginal mutant called Gateway, who creates portals, having worked for the X-Men during the Aussie Outback era in the 1980s, and helping Trevor Fitzroy escape Sentinels in these issues. So, Bishop does also have Aboriginal heritage. It is also worth noting that Bishop has appeared in a range of media outside of the X-Men animated series, including the Wolverine in the X-Men animated series of the 2010s that lasted one season but was phenomenal. Worth checking out if you can find it. You will also see below an image of his great-grandfather Gateway. You will see a female in similar garb to Bishop, and that is his sister Shard, who popped up in a number of future storylines outside of these issues. Oh, and Bishop also popped up in X-Men Days of Future Past in live action. Emma Frost, aka the White Queen, is an Omega-level telepath similar to Jean Grey. Emma Frost debuted in the Dark Phoenix Saga storyline in the Uncanny X-Men issue 129 in 1980, created by writer Chris Claremont and artist and co-writer John Byrne. She later appeared in the 1983 New Mutant series. Emma would later develop a second mutation, with her skin transforming into a diamond form in 2003 in New X-Men issue 139, set way after these issues. Emma Frost is a member of the Hellfire Club, which Chris Claremont was inspired to create after seeing the episode A Touch of Brimstone from the television show The Avengers, unrelated to the Marvel's version of Avengers. The British version of The Avengers is all about a spy duo, John Steed and Emma Peel, and in that particular episode they infiltrate a criminal and hedonistic underground society. Emma Frost was specifically inspired by the character of Emma Peel, portrayed by actress Diana Rigg, who famously dons a provocative corset, collar, and boots and becomes the Queen of Sin in that particular episode. The name Hellfire Club, in fact, has a historical precedent, having been a popular name for gentlemen's clubs in the 18th century. Additionally, the leaders of the Hellfire Club, also known as the hierarchy of the Inner Circle in the Marvel Comics, is modelled on the pieces of a chess set with black and white cassettes of kings, queens, bishops, and rooks. A later version of the Hellfire Club would add a third red set of kings, queens, bishops, and rooks. And Magneto at one time was part of the Hellfire Club as the Grey King. Emma Frost is the White Queen in the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club likes to recruit people of power, wealth, and ambition, although eventually the inner circle of the Hellfire Club mainly comprises of mutants. The important exception is the former White King of the Hellfire Club, Donald Pierce, a cyborg human who infiltrated the club in order to fuel his genocidal, mutant-hating agenda and kill the rest of the club. After being found out and cast out, he builds a team of Aussie cyborgs called the Reavers, dedicated to exterminating mutants. As White Queen of the Hellfire Club, Frost held many titles, one of which was chairman of the board and CEO of Frost International, which helped to fund the activities of the Lords Cardinal. Frost also became the chairman of the Board of Trustees and the headmistress of the Massachusetts Academy, a school for mutants which served as a counterpoint to Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. At this academy, Emma mentored the mutant team known as the Hellions, including Tarot, Roulette, Empath, Cat's Eye, Jetstream, Warpath, Beef, and Bevatron. The abilities were most of them obvious from their codenames. Alongside the Hellions, Frost encountered the Hellions' rival team, Xavier's New Mutants several times, who are like the Junior X-Men, just for those that aren't already aware. When the New Mutants were later killed and resurrected by a cosmic entity called Beyonder, as a tie-in to an event called Secret Wars, they were left traumatized and withdrawn. Frost offered her assistance in telepathically restoring them to their former selves. She then coerced their headmaster Magneto into allowing them to join the Massachusetts Academy for a time, but that did not last long, and the New Mutants left Emma's tutelage, and their mentor leader Magneto was usurped by Cable, and the New Mutants lineup shifted and quickly became X-Force. Previously on the Uncanny X-Men, prior to the events of this issue, in X-Factor 67, and remember, X-Factor is a spin-off X-Men comic. It has nothing to do with the singing show. There's not even a twinkle in anybody's eye at this point in time, just to be crystal clear. In X-Factor issue 67, in a chalet in Switzerland, Sebastian Shaw, the Black King of the Hellfire Club, has just discovered that someone has bought controlling interest in his company and forced him out. It is revealed that his son, Shinobi Shaw, is the individual that has bought out his business and has ruined him. Sebastian attacks his son, but Shinobi discloses to his father that his mutant power, the power to control his own density, is manifested, and reaching into Sebastian's chest, proceeds to give him a heart attack before he blows up the chalet. Shinobi rises from the ashes, declaring that his father is fired. Meanwhile, just for a bit of backfill, for anyone that isn't already aware, Sentinels are artificially intelligent robots designed to hunt mutant kind. Although a prototype was developed in San Francisco in 1906, the modern Sentinels were first created by a human called Dr. Bolivar Trask, as seen in X-Men issue 14 in 1965. His intention was to use them to save humanity from what he saw as an impending threat to the species' existence due to the increasing numbers of emerging mutants. The Sentinels have adapted and changed over time, sometimes gaining enough sentience to turn against both humans and mutants, other times co-opted by other humans and or mutants for their own nefarious purposes. Alright. So, now starting on the actual comics that people have been reading. Uncanny X-Men, issue 281. Sentinels attack the Reavers base in Australia. Those are the robot people, the robot cyborg people, sorry. From those that don't remember, they kill them, but are primarily after Donald Pierce. That's the former member of the Hellfire Club that I was talking about before. Meanwhile, the X-Men are invited to a party by Emma Frost. When the X-Men arrive, there are some hostilities between them and the Hellions. Soon, however, Trevor Fitzroy attacks, quickly killing Beef and Jetstring. This was Trevor Fitzroy's first ever appearance in comic books. Fitzroy hails from the same dystopian future as Bishop. A mutant criminal, Fitzroy possesses the ability to absorb energy from human beings and uses that energy to open time portals. The X-Men then fight Fitzroy, but find him a match for them. Meanwhile, Pierce runs to Gateway, that's the great-grandfather of Bishop, and tells Gateway to teleport Fitzroy to whoever is responsible. To teleport Pierce to whoever is responsible for the Sentinels. The portal opens to where the X-Men are, and the Sentinels attack them as well. One kills Taro, another Hellion. Another knocks down Emma Frost. Jean Grey is struck down also. When the fight is almost over, the Sentinels are destroyed. The X-Men claim that Jean Grey is dead, and Emma Frost has disappeared and is in a coma. Yes, a couple of continuity issues that are just trivia. Empath is shown along with the Hellions in this issue. However, he is supposedly in a place in the Amazon called Nova Roma during this time frame, and in other comics is relayed these events in this issue and is seemingly unaware that they have occurred before that point in time. Another continuity error in the trivia is Taro is shown to be terminated by one of the Sentinels in this issue. However, she is alive and killed again in the next issue by Trevor Fitzroy. So, they really wanted to make sure that Taro was dead. There's also a coloring error in some panels that sees the flesh in certain panels between the top of Emma Frost's high boots and the corset bikini that she's wearing, colored as though it's covered in white connecting fabric. And then other times it's shown as just connecting flesh that's not connected between the boots and the corset. I suspect people are going to fall into two camps potentially with this lot of issues, especially with this first issue. They're either going to find the characters a little two-dimensional, and the issues are fight-oriented, and find the plotting middle of the road, elevated by dynamic art and an enormous cast that can be tough to follow if not already steeped in X-Men lore. The second camp will not mind potentially that these comics are setting a new status quo, that these characters you don't know why they are the way they are, that you're diving headfirst into this gigantic world, drawing an outline of an enormous superhero world, drawing excitement from how much more there is that seems to be here that just fits into one story, which sometimes references storylines going back decades. Uncanny X-Men, issue 282. The X-Men return to the mansion with the body of Jean Grey, who was killed by the Sentinels. The X-Men attended the party at the Hellfire Club. Xavier scans Jean and discovers that the woman is not dead, but has somehow transferred her psyche into the body of Emma Frost, who supposedly died, though Xavier does not believe so. Jean wakes up inside Emma's body and witnesses Fitzroy forcibly take control of the Upstarts from Shinobi Shaw. The Upstarts were part of a secret competition founded by Selene, Black Queen of the Hellfire Club, who wanted to test potential members for her own new inner circle. Overseen by the Games Master, the Upstarts would try to kill as many mutants as possible, and the Games Master would award points based on the mutants' power, skills, and general significance in the world. At times, he would raise the value of certain mutants, so the Upstarts would all try to assassinate them. At other times, the Games Master would also reward the death of non-mutants. To gain entry to the Upstarts competition, the requirement was to kill a member of the inner circle of the Hellfire Club, but later members were not required to do so. Usually the Game Master claimed that their participation would make the game more interesting. The member with the most points at the end of the competition would win the prize. It was never explicitly stated what the prize was, although a statement by Andrea Strucker in X-Men, Volume 2, Issue 4, and a notation on the back of the Upstarts X-Men trading card stated that the prize was immortality. But it was inferred that the winner would gain control over the other contestants as well as gain a lot of power and influence. The Upstarts are a very 90s idea that quickly petered out and are never really heard from ever again in the 21st century. Later on, Fitzroy displays his powers and opens a portal to the future to bring some of his allies. When he tries to absorb Emma, Jean retaliates and surprises everyone with her telekinesis. The X-Men find Jean, thanks to data from the Sentinel, and they bring her back to the Blackbird to return her back to her body. The other X-Men stay behind to battle Fitzroy, who kills all the Hellions in his possession and opens a giant portal, which unleashes an army of denizens from the future. The X-Men defeat the army and turn their attention to Fitzroy, who is attacked by new arrivals from the portal, including a man named Bishop, who wears a uniform similar to those of the X-Men. Most of the Hellions had existed since 1984, with the exception of Beef and Bevatron, who joined in 1991. So killing the majority of them, with the exception of Empath, was a brutal move by the writers. Most of them would remain deceased until the Krakoan era of the X-Men, helmed by Jonathan Hickman starting in 2019, which saw the resurrection of a lot of previously deceased mutants. Anyway, that's the end of the recap for this issue. Yeah, as I mentioned, I read a lot of New Mutants comics. Similar to how, I had a decent chunk of X Factor, because my dad was definitely a fan of the OG 5 X-Men that were the original 5 members of X Factor, but I also had a lot of New Mutants issues because they were constantly in dollar bits. Obviously, being seen as the Junior X-Men, I'm sure a lot of comic collectors saw them as lesser than, essentially. But at the end of the day, there were some great stories told in those comics, and the Hellions were the central counterparts, the opposing school, basically. That whenever they went to a communal school dance, basically, they'd be the ones sitting on the other side of the dance hall, essentially. Which is part of why I found it so weird in issue 281, whereas they've got beef with the X-Men because they never really interacted with the X-Men. The X-Men were either off doing their own thing, or for a large portion of the time, they were off in especially once Magneto entered the scene, the Hellions were around more. They were off in the Outback, so it's they never had a ton of interaction. So this is issue 281 was forced tension between the two groups. Yeah, so it's only if they've heard stories of the New Mutants more than their actual personal experiences, which is weird. Right. On to issue 283. The 3 new portal arrivals, members of the XSE, Xavier's Security Enforcement, Bishop, Malcolm, and Randall, battle the criminals from the future who desperately try to save Fitzroy. While Bishop kills the criminals, Fitzroy escapes, only to be captured by Shinobi Shaw, who tells him that the Games Master deemed Fitzroy a cheater and takes his ring back. The X-Men try to stop Bishop, who seems to be an X-Men from the future, but their man believes that Fitzroy is trying to trick him with imposter X-Men. The X-Men battle Bishop, Malcolm, and Randall until Storm defeats the trio. Meanwhile, Xavier and Forge help restore Jean back to her body, while Emma's mind is left on ice until the writers decide to defrost her in a future story, specifically Uncanny X-Men 311 to 314, when she'll switch minds with Iceman, which has massive long-term consequences for him. Fitzroy's complex detonates, and the X-Men are separated from Bishop. Bishop and his men escape to trap the rest of the criminals and the real X-Men. The X-Men regroup, and Storm is more determined than ever to discover the truth about Bishop. Meanwhile, Games Master and Selene watch the events unfold and laugh at what they have in store for the Upstarts. As a piece of trivia, Bishop's emblem he wears in this issue states his organization as the Xavier School Enforcers rather than the Xavier Security Enforcers, as it is later revealed, which is hilarious because Xavier School Enforcers makes it sound like they're all monitors almost. Alright, so what were our thoughts on this particular issue? Yeah. 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 Could you recall similarities between his story here and how he was sort of used in the animated series? Yeah. Fair, totally fair. Yeah. Yeah, he has. This is the only time that he comes back basically from the future because his first appearance is adapted in the animated series is adapted from I think X-Men issue 8, roughly from the top of my head, where basically he comes back to try and stop a politician getting killed because the death of the politician is what leads to a huge uprising. Yeah, they use a little bit of Days of Future Past, but it's also bringing in a different storyline in X-Men issue 8, where basically he believes that that a member of the X-Men has betrayed them and was responsible for the death, and then he reveals he believes it to be Gambit, but in the end, little spoiler alert for a comic that's 30 years old now. he ends up finding out that it's actually Mystique impersonating Gambit that assassinated the Senator in the original corrupted version of the timeline that he's trying to fix. Yeah. So that all does directly pull from a specific comic. Alright, a very quick character bio for Sunfire. First appearing in X-Men issue 64 in 1970, and co-created by Roy Thomas and Don Heck, Sunfire is a Japanese mutant who can generate superheated plasma and fly. While he has been recruited to the X-Men multiple times, his tenures tend to be short due to his blunt, antagonistic temperament, making him ill-suited for teamwork, and his patriotism to Japan, trumping his mutant heritage on many an occasion. His original costume was based on Japan's rising sun flag, symbolizing the sun, and used by feudal warlords in 1600s through 1800s, and has since been adopted by various naval and maritime branches in Japan. Light research suggests the flag is controversial in Korea, China, Russia, Taiwan, and with Allied World War II veterans, where it is associated with Japanese war crimes, the Axis of World War II, and Japanese militarism and imperialism. But essentially, he's got a very different look that a lot of Whilce Portacio's characters tend to have in his 90s comic books. I've also put some images of his early appearances, which were very small, but pivotal to me in the 90s animated series, because he was on a very famous episode called Slave Island, where basically a bunch of mutants were enslaved in the animated series, and it was like one of those ones where it's like I watched it all the time as a kid, because it's like not a lot of the mutants had non-speaking roles in the background, but they were ones that, because I had issues of X-Force and Mutants, X-Factor, and Alpha Flight, it's like I was like, I recognize them, North Star, Mystique, and the Blob, and it's like some of those characters even popped up later on in other issues, so yeah, it's really cool. And I love that the 90s series was so dedicated to, like, I know it was driven from an action figure perspective, wanting to have as many action figure options as possible, but it was also really cool as a comic book nerd perspective, just having all of those Easter eggs essentially as characters in the background. Not just objects, but actual characters. Segue for me, the reason I did a quick bio on Sunfire was so that you would better understand issue 284. On the Sakhalin Islands, Sunfire meets with government officials from Japan and Russia to deal with a massive sealed crater on the island. While investigating, Sunfire uses his powers on the capped crater. The crater changes into a void and knocks out Sunfire. Three figures emerge from the void and kill everyone else. Meanwhile, the X-Men are on their way home from the latest battle, and they receive a distress call. They reach the island and engage in a battle with the aliens. However, Storm realizes that the aliens are fighting to protect the crater. The aliens are defeated, but one of them reveals that they are not here to kill mindlessly, but to protect the X-Men's world from the void. With that said, the void opens and sucks in the X-Men, while Xavier and Forge escape. Meanwhile, Bishop, Malcolm, and Randall begin to hunt down the criminals from the future. Unfortunately, the men have no other choice but to kill the criminals, who all refuse to turn themselves in. As a piece of trivia, there's a panel where the trio call each other Primate. In this case, they're not calling themselves a monkey. Apparently, Primate is a Latin-derived name of the Catholic Church used to talk about a leader. The trio of aliens' last appearance is in Uncanny X-Men 286, and they're never seen again, so they're not overly important to X-Men lore. 3 inkers and 2 colorists on this book, and still there's coloring errors. There's a panel where Archangel's face skin is not blue, and there's another panel where Archangel's wings are clear, which I actually posted that second one up on the slide. One of the credited writers of this issue, John Byrne, who do the scripting of the speech bubbles after the art pages came back for the artists, has commented that sometimes he got the pages very late and sometimes out of order. So that's likely an explanation for why the speech bubbles have all the comments about them looking alien before one of them is dehelmeted and is shown to be human. Portacio in these issues has a tendency to use one of the ickier tropes of comic books, unconscious of dead women being portrayed sexually. We get it in this issue with close-ups of Emma Frost's bodice while unconscious, and we get it in next issue with an unconscious Storm. It's just a problematic, male gaze-centric way of portraying female characters. And also, whilst I've got the slide up, I also want to point out the top left panel that has Jean going, "Right, I'd better be careful about that. If I come back from the dead one more time, I'll be in serious danger of turning into some kind of walking cliche." The joke being there that in the next 30 years, Jean Grey would, I think, die at least 2 more times. So, on to issue 285. After being sucked into the void, the X-Men are teleported to another world, which is torn by war, but are all separated. Unfortunately, the void continues to grow and threatens to suck in the entire Earth. Colossus and Jean are surrounded by rebel forces, who mistake Colossus for their ancient savior, who is the only one who can close the portal. Weird that. While Jean and Colossus are taken back to the rebel camp, Archangel finds himself aiding some civil guards against the rebels. However, Archangel's metal wings take control on him, and he kills the rebels. Archangel snaps out of his trance and is horrified to learn what's happened. He is taken back to the civil guard base and meets their leader, Shah-Ha-Ah-Zath, leader of the Triumvirate. Before Archangel can object, Shah-Ha-Ah-Zath makes him leader of her forces and prepares him for the final battle against the rebels. Storm is found by a mysterious man who sneaks her into the rebel base upon hearing her story and the story of the Savior's return. Once there, the man confronts Colossus and reveals that he is his brother, the long-lost and thought dead Mikhail Rasputin. Meanwhile, on Earth, Bishop and the others continue to kill the criminals from the future, and they also swear to prevent their horrible future from ever occurring. Anyway, that's the end of the summary for issue 285, much shorter. And if you couldn't tell, my Shah-Ha-Zaf is very much inspired by the Klingons from Star Trek, in how I chose to read that out. I believe the fight that referring to in that panel that's on the slide there might even be the one from Giant Size X-Men 1, because the whole thing about it was all about pulling together a new crop of international X-Men, those who are aware, in that original appearance that opened up the diversity of the X-Men. It's all about pulling together a new team to go rescue the old team that had basically been taken out by a sentient island at the time. And only Cyclops had escaped. And then the new team went in to extract the old team. And then at one point the old team, I believe, formed the new team under the island's influence. It's interesting that this is his first appearance, considering, there's just these issues of so much, drawn and thrown in stuff from the past a lot in these past couple of issues, and they're just like, hey, we're throwing in new stuff as well as the old stuff that we're funneling in. And you're not going to be able to tell, in the moment, because, back then in 91, 92, it's like you didn't have instant internet access unless you worked for the military. And I don't think they somehow had Wikipedia providing with helpful X-Men issue summaries. Yeah. All right, moving on to Uncanny X-Men 286. Colossus is in disbelief that his brother is alive, but quickly learns that his eyes do not deceive him. The X-Men tell Mikhail that he needs to close the portal with his powers, but Mikhail refuses to, and recants the tale of how he first arrived in this world, and after a brutal confrontation, he defeated his enemy with his powers, but killed all of the thousands present, including his beloved wife. Colossus is angered that Mikhail refuses to help, leaving the rest of the team in a jam. Archangel is mind-controlled by the Avatar to serve her army, which includes some non-consensual kissing while under the influence of mind control. And the next day, he leads the Triumvirate against the Rebels and X-Men. Jean snaps Archangel free from the spell, just as Iceman and Sunfire reunite with the team. Colossus is injured by the Triumvirate, and Mikhail attacks. The void grows bigger and jettisons the Avatar into the sky. Colossus and the X-Men finally convince Mikhail to use his powers, and with aid, he is able to close the portal without killing anyone. He returns the X-Men and himself to Earth with the assistance of Sunfire, Iceman, and Jean. Alright, Uncanny X-Men issue 287. Bishop, Malcolm, and Randall attack the last group of criminals in a escape from the future in a New York City nightclub, where they kill most of them. The tide of the battle shifts, and the criminals kill Malcolm and Randall in an explosion that almost kills all of the surviving bad guys except for two. Bishop is about to avenge Malcolm and Randall's death when the X-Men arrive. Bishop shoots at Storm, aiming for the killer behind her. The team mistakes Bishop's shots as hostility and attack him, which leads to Bishop being impaled after being propelled back from Colossus' punch. While the X-Men discover the truth, Bishop runs after the last criminal, Styleglut, only to pass out in an alley. It's a bizarre name. While unconscious, Bishop dreams about the events preceding this in his own time, when he and the others captured Fitzroy in the sewers. They discovered a recording by Jean Grey in the sewers, proving that the X-Men were killed by one of their own. Bishop contacted Bishop didn't contact the sewers. Bishop contacted the witness, who reportedly was the last to see the X-Men alive, but the man refused to help. The witness is a temporal anomaly. He exists as the merging of all timelines, meaning he is able to exist at all points in time at once, and has been confused with Gambit, though this assumption is incorrect. Fitzroy escapes from prison and took an army of criminals to the past. Bishop, Malcolm, and Randall followed. Bishop wakes up in the infirmary, convinced that these are the real X-Men. Xavier speaks with Bishop, and moments later surprises the team by making Bishop the newest X-Men. So as a piece of trivia, the full unbroken version of Jean's recording is shown in 1996's Onslaught X-Men issue 1, warning the world about the character Onslaught, a sentient mental fusion entity psionically created from the darker aspects of the consciousness of Professor Charles Xavier and Magneto. This reveal happens 4 years after these issues were published. And as previously mentioned, the witness was believed to be an older Remy LeBeau / Gambit, but has since been revealed to be a completely different, unrelated person. Most of the witnesses' appearances in the 90s were connected to Bishop's early adventures, and again, they were just one of those ideas / characters that sort of just petered out into non-existence again. There's never really been picked up. And I wonder if it's like a lot of that is because like they genuinely weren't good ideas, or if alternatively, if a lot of it came from so many of the current creators, like Whilce Portacio, for example, that's like, doing a lot of the penciling for a lot of these issues, and also, Jim Lee, who's like, helping co-plot a lot of these X-Men books. They both left to go start Image. A lot of other creatives, left to go to Image. So it's like how much that fell by the wayside because of stuff that was happening, outside of the actual book continuity. Also, I've literally only just noticed that the cover completely spoils both of those characters' deaths. Yeah, I literally had not put it together before this point. I was just like, oh yeah, there's bullet shots all around them. They're both in war, yelling poses. No, I don't think they even had the Gambit thing planned at that time. I doubt they would have had any plan. They're spinning a lot of wheels and just seeing what works at the stage. And I think this was just one of those things that, like, we can plant this juicy seed here. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Does he show it? Is it the same color of the lightning that he shoots back out? Or is it, like, does it have a pinkish tinge to the lightning? Uh, yeah. Well, who knows if that was even just if that was actually intended or if that was a mistake by the colorist. Because take a look at this. I think this was the issue where I hit my breaking point of I can't do a bio on every single person. With the amount of people that were helping with inking and coloring and yeah, all that kind of thing. Yeah, so I think it could have easily just been a case of inconsistency with that many chefs working on the pod again. And maybe it's like because I think yeah, I think you're definitely right in terms of like the style of things. It's like if he got hit by an eye beam, it's like he absorbs it and redirects his own energy blast, back as through his eyes, whereas it's exclusively through his hands pretty much later on. Um, yeah, but I don't think it was ever meant to be. He was ever throwing the exact same type of energy back. I think his plant power, even on the trading cards and stuff, is always I turn it into my own thing. And I will say, with the one little snippet that I have seen, without giving any spoilers for the X-Men '97 animated series, it's a little action scene based on the one little clip that they released, and there's a shot of Bishop getting hit by energy, and it's the clearest I've ever seen in like any animated form of like Bishop's powers of like it hitting him, the energy being one color, him absorbing it into like the red stuff, and him directing the power back out. It's like it's a beautifully done like little swift shot that perfectly like captures what his power set is, like that one like little 5-second frame of animation. Yeah. Whereas it's like a lot of the comics, it's like it took me a long time to actually work out what Bishop's powers were because he relies so heavily on his guns most of the time. It was a cool moment in that Days of Future Past movie where like Storm charges him up by hitting him with lightning, basically, and then it's like you get to see it course through him and change. Yeah. Uncanny X-Men issue 288. Jean overhears a conversation between some of the men and Cyclops, and there's trouble to learn that there may be something going on between him and their teammate Psylocke. Cyclops and Beast meet Bishop, who is soon put under Storm's tutelage. Bishop demands that Storm take him to New York so he can get accustomed to the culture. Reluctantly, Storm agrees, but decides to take the rest of the team with her as well. The team goes out, along with Bobby's girlfriend, Opal Tanaka. However, Opal does not tell Bobby that an old rival of his is coming to visit her soon. Bishop takes in the wonders of the city, but also finds Steiglot, the last of the 93 living criminals escaped from the future. Bishop attacks Steiglot, and the two get into a fight, neither noticing the massive damage they're causing. Storm tries to stop the two, but ends up incidentally fueling Bishop's powers, which he uses to kill Steiglot. Bishop tells Storm that Malcolm and Randall died trying to bring Steiglot to justice. He will not let them die in vain. Bishop goes to punch the already dead Steiglot, but Storm blows him to the ground with her wind. Storm tells Bishop that he accomplished his goal already, though it flies in the face of everything the X-Men stand for. Colossus, who is armored up, tells Bishop the X-Men have killed before, but they have never engaged in wholesale slaughter. Colossus holds down Bishop while Storm tells him that he has to learn immediately that they are subject to different laws than he is used to. The X-Men do not kill. Storm tells Bishop to look around and learn. No matter what Bishop's role was in the future, the X-Men are the protectors of the here and now. They fight to preserve, not destroy. It is the safety of those around them that is of primary concern, and X-Men would willingly give up their own life to save an innocent. Storm shows Bishop all the damage he has done, and all the civilians he has injured, the other X-Men helping people and clearing wreckage that was created in the fight between Bishop and Steiglot. Storm's words cut deep into Bishop's soul. Colossus feels Bishop relax, and then he lets him go. Storm tells Bishop to look again, let the scene burn into his memory. No matter who the enemy is, he is only partly responsible for the damage here tonight. Much is not all of the pain and suffering is on Bishop's head. Bishop rubs his head in anguish and tells Storm that he knows, but this is all very different. In his time, there was no need to be careful around civilians. The very sight of him or his guards would have been enough to send people running for cover. When he fought battles, there was no need to worry about civilian casualties. It was the battle alone that concerned them. Bishop realizes there is much he needs to learn. That night, Bishop gives Storm his combat insignia from his uniform and promises to listen to her more. So yeah, that's the summary for issue 288. And I'm sorry, but I had to include the panel of Archangel flying off without any clothes on. I've appropriately censored it. Oh, he was feeling... I think he was feeling sorry for himself or something along those lines, basically. After he killed all those people in the previous issue of the Ultimate Dimension, got into that fugue state of being mind controlled again. Archangel / Warren Worthington seems to have a propensity for being mind controlled by others. Archangel, the Avatar in the previous comic, and then later on I think he gets controlled by Betsy at one point. It's just a human mind control cushion. All right, on to issue 289. In the mansion, Storm begins Bishop's orientation into the X-Men. Bishop, however, still has problems adjusting to the fact he is with the X-Men of legend. Archangel continues to brood over his transformation. Mystique tries to reach out to Archangel, but does nothing more than taunt the man who lashes out at her. Storm, Bishop, and Forge investigate the ruckus, but Archangel leaves the mansion in anger when Xavier tries to reprimand him. Storm blames Mystique, who is defended by Forge. Forge storms out, and Storm gives chase. Forge confronts her about their relationship and wants her to leave the X-Men with him, but insinuates that she has problems with having a life outside of the team. In a move that catches Storm off guard, Forge proposes to her. So, some context here. Forge is romanticizing times where Storm has either been depowered or they have been cut off from their worlds and support systems. So to think that the solution is to leave Storm's friends, or where Storm finds purpose, and ignore Storm talking about how she doesn't know she's the same person he fell in love with, by essentially love-bombing her with a proposal, is all hugely problematic. Forge, despite his difficulty relating to the emotions of others, which is a recurring explored theme through various X comics, is capable of being a really good character at times. Those times are typically when he's kept far away from Storm. Meanwhile, Iceman and Opal have dinner with Bobby's parents, but Mr. Drake does not keep his opinion on their interracial relationship quiet, which angers Bobby. You're very much seeing the relationship Bobby has with his father, the denial he has about how bad his dad is. You can see a lot of the markers that are then drawn upon by later creatives as to why Bobby would not have come out to his parents sooner, when it would require having conversations even more heated than this one. And you can see how Bobby's dad's attitudes would create internalized self-loathing in Bobby himself for both his mutantness and so many of his other aspects. Suddenly, Bobby's old rival and Opal's cousin, Hero, first introduced a couple of years prior in X-Factor comics, arrives and tells them that Bobby's parents' lives are in danger. Suddenly, the Cyber-Eye appear and announce that they have come to kill the Drakes. As a piece of trivia, apparently there is a recurring gag that a lot of the X-Men are terrible at doing ties, hence why Bobby is traipsing around with one in his combos with first Forge, then Archangel. This running visual gag resurfaces in X-Men issue 30, the Scott and Jean wedding issue. There is a portrait in the study of Magneto the same size as that of Professor Xavier, because during the Claremont run, there was an extensive run where Magneto was the Xavier's Institute headmaster, while Xavier was gallivanting in outer space with his space princess girlfriend, something that is going to be incorporated into the X-Men 97 animated series. Yeah, that's like the early 100s issues of X Factor, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so that all occurs after this, basically. Yeah, and it's worth noting that Forge has a little bit of a relationship with Mystique. I'm rereading this issue. If you couldn't tell already, I'm not a fan of the Storm Forge relationship, and my blood was boiling by the end of this issue. Yeah, no. Yeah, it's always a complicated thing with parents. It's like, the relationships you keep versus the ones, like, it takes a lot of strength to be able to cut off a toxic parental unit, basically, and not everyone's able to do it, basically. And it's like we've read the Iceman issues where we see him die. Yeah, and that's a lot of years later. Well, 30 years in our time. It's probably 2 to 5 years in comic book time. With how that works. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no. Surprised the character lasted as long as they did. And yeah, they were all constantly like. This is their most racially charged presence, I think. I say I haven't read every X-Men comic, but yeah, no, they're never great. On the off chance that there's anyone that doesn't know who Mystique is, I'm just going to give the briefest bio about Mystique. Mystique, first appearing in Ms. Marvel, issue 16 in 1978, created by Dave Cockrum and Chris Claremont, is a mutant shapeshifter with the ability to molecularly shift the formation of her biological cells at will to change her appearance, and thereby assume the forms of other humans and animals. She can also alter her voice to duplicate exactly that of another person. Her shapeshifting powers mean that her true age remains enigmatic. Her earliest attested appearances date back to the early 1900s. For many years, it is believed that Mystique was Nightcrawler's mother and Azazel his father. However, a 2023 storyline revealed it was Destiny who gave birth to the X-Men superhero Nightcrawler, rather than Mystique. The two conceived him after Mystique used her powers to take on a male form. Destiny, first appearing in Uncanny X-Men issue 141 in 1980, created by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, is a blind mutant woman with precognitive abilities that is Mystique's closest friend and on/off-again lover. Destiny was killed in 1989. One of the most touching, heartbreaking stories I've ever read was Destiny leaving Mystique with precise instructions about how to scatter her ashes in a story in X Factor Annual, issue 6, in 1991, by Peter David and Guang Hia, some of the panels of which can be seen in the slide that I've currently got up. In 2021, during the Krakoan era, when mutants could be resurrected from death, Mystique did not react well when Xavier and Moira McTaggart tried to keep Irene Adler, aka Destiny, from being resurrected because of fears of her precognitive abilities. Mystique went scorched earth and was reunited with her resurrected lover. Yeah, but as I said, I cannot emphasize enough just the number of times I've gone back and just read those couple of pages where it's the Mystique scattering Destiny's ashes. Like, it's a very morbid. It's a morbid, like as you can see, it's like it's a morbid black humor sort of thing. Yes, it's beautiful. Yeah, yeah. And this was like that story as well. It was written before the whole aspect of the big lovers was even written into their love story. Like, at the very most, implied was the best that they could do because of the Comic Code Authority. Yeah, they were best friends basically. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And I think it very much appeased my British humor of, "You'll never be in my face or getting in my hair again. Goodbye, Destiny." Yeah. Yeah, very well done. All right, moving on to the final issue that we're covering tonight, just because I can't hold you guys hostage for any longer. Uncanny X-Men 290. At La Casa Mia, the Drapes escape, while Iceman and Hero battle the Cyber Eye, who want the Drakes dead to safeguard their family honor. Opal stays behind with the boys, who eventually realize the fight is hopeless. Hero says goodbye to Opal and tells her to leave with Iceman. Iceman promises to come back, but as they leave, Hero initiates a self-destruct program, which kills him and the Cyber Eye. Meanwhile, Colossus and Mikhail go to a travel agency to make a trip to Russia. While Colossus is inside getting the tickets, Mikhail is overcome by a severe headache outside. When a pizza boy runs into them, the enraged Mikhail uses his powers to merge the boy with a tree. Unseen by Piotr, of course. Forge speaks with Jean about his proposal to Storm, but he is worried that Storm will say no. He asks Jean to use her telepathy to see if Storm really loves him, but Jean tells him that is not her place to say, which means to Forge that Storm doesn't truly love him. Mystique continues to taunt Bishop, who is about to attack her when Forge intervenes. Forge realizes that Mystique needs him more than anyone, and she cannot stay in the mansion. This is drawing on a line of prophecy in Uncanny X-Men issue 255, in which Destiny told Mystique that she would be with Forge. Storm makes her decision, but before she can tell Forge, he confronts her and takes back the proposal. He mansplains who Storm is to her face, telling her she can never really lead the X-Men, and belittles her, calling her a child, comparing her to a stray animal, emotionally manipulates her by dredging up her most traumatic childhood memory that results in both the death of her parents and created her claustrophobia, and then has the gall to tell her that she's the one that has numerous problems to sort through before she can marry him. He equates trying to change her as somehow helping her, somehow thinking that that's a thing that people in healthy relationships intentionally do. He tries to define what a normal life should be for her, instead of listening to what Storm wants in a normal life, or giving her the room to figure that out. He apologizes for even asking her. It tells her that he is leaving with Mystique before Storm even has an opportunity to process the emotional hurt that he's just inflicted upon her. After Forge leaves, the crushed Storm reveals that she was going to accept Forge's proposal. Long term, a bullet dodged. Anyway, how did other people feel about this issue? A little bit of bias, but also at the same time, I feel like I've held back a little. Anyone that walks away from a person that 5 seconds ago they said they love, who's a crying puddle on the floor, and they're willing to just leave them like that, I know, but there's ways of doing things dramatically, but in an emotionally healthy manner. This is not it. This is men writing how they think women feel and mansplaining to a woman, and it's just like, oh my god. You didn't let the woman get a word in edgeways. Sorry for ruining the illusion a little, but at the same time, I think it's the right historical take away. Yeah, because I will admit, as a kid, like I definitely didn't. I think I had this. I might have had this issue, maybe. I don't remember this. I don't remember having this cover as a kid, but I love the cover now. Actually, maybe then I didn't know if I didn't have the cover. Yeah, I don't think I had this issue when I was a kid, so yeah, I don't think I even read it then. So I think this might have been like my first or second time reading this issue. But I absolutely love the cover. It's a Mark Silvestri cover, I believe. It's one of the only ones. Mark Silvestri is another one of the ones that actually leaves to go join Image not too long after this issue was published. And I believe Silvestri was responsible for the Witchblade comics, for those that follow their obscure 90s action heroines. But I have talked effusively about Witchblade in the past as well, for non-comic related reasons, primarily. They were published a lot by, they're still published a lot by Top Cow, who also published the Tomb Raider comics. But yeah, so again, the epitome of issues that you could never buy and then read around your parents. Yeah, because their definition of armor on the female lead. Yeah, I watched the TV show where basically it was like the D-grade special effects where every time they showed the armor, it was a full suit of armor, like a historic medieval suit of armor she'd be wearing, and it'd be like flashing like white screens basically between her normal human detective form, cop form, and then like the suit of armor. And then yeah, and so when I eventually saw the cover, I was just like, did a double take of like, what the hell? How does that protect anything? Jump ahead for a second, because Jade provided some thoughts, which I'm going to read out, and then I'll hear from everybody else. So Jade's favourite panel in the Bishop's Crossing Collected Edition was on page 146 of the Collected Edition, and you can see it there. They love the acknowledgement that a lot has happened before these issues, basically, and Jade included a laugh face emoji in regards to that. So yeah, and then they also listed some of the other panels on the right-hand side that you can see that they enjoyed. Jade says, look at these necks! Also, Cyclops is becoming a balloon or something. To be clear, if I needed to consistently draw the speed and detail of the X-Men artists, I would pat myself on the back. And Jade mentioned, from the perspective of someone who dips in and out of these stories, this was exactly what I expected. Complicated histories and futures, brackets, all the pew-pew-pew, and these guys just never catching a break. Haha. The comics are pretty good at flagging that something happened before, including referencing to a comic that happened in for newer readers anyway. Jade mentioned that they have also seen a long time ago the classic X-Men cartoon, and my cousin used to collect the X-Men cards that Jade would look through, so they're not a total new in regards to X-Men, especially 90s X-Men. But that Jade says, don't ask me any specific questions about plot characters. Which I think in some ways mirrors Dumptace's exposure to the X-Men. just a quick recap for those that aren't aware. Generation X was like another team that was it was a new X book basically that was helmed by Banshee, who's like the one that screams a lot basically and flies through the air using like little wings. He's also Irish Scotsman, Irish or Scottish, Irish. Thank you. Yep. So it's helmed by Banshee and the Emma Frost, the White Queen that you've seen in the coma for most of these issues. The two of them lead the team, and the main other member that you see there is one Jubilee, transferred from X-Men. Yeah. 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 Again, the Hellfire Club, another one of those ones where like the outfits were like I wasn't as like taken aback by like the provocativeness of the Hellfire Club outfits as I was with the Witchblade armor. I think because it's like I at least like the cool aesthetic of the chest pieces and the opposing colors of the black and white costumes at least. But yeah, again, one of those things I've probably kept it away from the parents seeing, and just like one of those things whenever the action figures have come out, it's just like I've got them, but I don't feature them prominently on my shelf. And thankfully, Marvel Legends is at least a little more discreet with the padding than the comics are at times.